to ask you to use your imagination for a second. It's the start of the Second World War. There's a young bloke. He's German. His name's Fritz. He's about, say, 19, 20 years old. His country's going to war and he's just been called up to go and join them. He doesn't know what he's up for, but he does what he has to do, so he goes. He's thrown onto a ship, a big Navy vessel called the Cormorant. Before too long, that ship is sunk by the Australian Navy at the top of Western Australia. The vessel that sunk it was called HMAS Sydney 2. That's around 1941 that happened. Old Fritz himself and his 315 survivors, they'll get captured by the Australian Navy and they're shipped off to Victoria. So 1943, West Australian Government approached the Federal Australian Government for some assistance with labour. For milling. Milling was rich out here, being very dense with jarrah. So they needed assistance with milling for firewood, both domestically, industrially, firewood for infrastructure, railway lines, things like that. So they approached Federal Government. The Federal Government saw it viable to use these prisoners of war they now had, i.e. our old friend Fritz from Germany. So they sent the prisoners of war they had from Victoria over here. Now by that time in 43, when those prisoners of war from Victoria were sent over, it was 1942 that there was already Italian prisoners of war. I thought something was biting my leg, it was just a plant. 1942, there was already a small number of Italian prisoners of war over here, specifically in this spot in Marinup. So at that point in time, imagine our friend Fritz, who's been captured. He's been a prisoner of war for X amount of time over in Victoria, and he's now put into this prisoner of war camp here in Marinup. So what is Marrinup P.O.W. camp? Its main purpose was purely for milling. And Marinup itself, because Marinup was a town site as well, all this beautiful jarrah that's here, it was capitalised on. And around the war, when the war was on, for obvious reasons, there was a real shortage of labour. And so they just couldn't keep up with the demand of the Perth metro area. So the idea was created in an area like this where they could get the labour in that the prisoners offered and start servicing the firewood that everyone needed. So the prisoner of war camp in Marinup was born. So as far as the prisoners were concerned, you had about over the 3 years that it was open, you had about 3,500 Italians came in and out through that period. But they were the ones that levelled the area for themselves and built their camp here. So then by the time 43 came, that was when the German P.O.Ws turned up. They walked into a completely built and functioning campsite and milling operation really too. Now obviously I'm making Fritz up. Fritz isn't a real person. But if you can just imagine an 18, 19, 20-year-old kid who's been told he's got to go to war. It was the same for here in Australia. He was told he had to go fight for his country. He didn't know what was coming. For him, he ended up being on a boat that was eventually sunk, and then he was taken captive. So then he ended up here, working in the bush in Australia. A lot of the POWs were quite thankful that they were able to be here in this particular camp. It was a lot safer than the other prisoner of war camps that they were in, say, the Middle East or Egypt or India even. The likelihood of them staying alive in those prisoner camps were quite slim. So when they got to Australia, they were quite thankful. And a lot of them, especially the Italians, that ended up immigrating here back into Australia. Places like this are nothing short of fascinating. The relics of the past are all still here for us to come and see. The foundations are still here of many of the buildings that were here. Now this is quite chilling, to say the least. This is the little jail, I suppose you could call it, for the camp. You can obviously see the worn spot going into the most used cell. You can see the dip in the concrete there, and I mean even a handprint where the hand would go, probably just be sitting there wearing the concrete out with their hand, you know. This big, obvious definition of where they would lay. That's quite chilling. The biggest reason for detention out here was escaping and unlawful behaviour. The minimum detention for here was 5 days, and I think the maximum was nearly a month. So, I mean, you can only imagine what that would do to someone laying on concrete somewhere like this for a month. Life out here in the bush, as you can imagine, it was no leisure cruise. They were prisoners. They still did have some things that they could do to pass the time, keep themselves busy and break up the monotony of all the work they had to do. So some of them were in a band. There were musicians out here and they were allowed to be in a band. There are a few that were also able to make their own uniforms, so that was nice. They even had a garden out here. And that's where I'm standing right now. I'm in the garden bed. Nature is starting to reclaim it, as you can imagine, but you can see that each garden bed they had was in the shape of a deck of cards. So they've got one over here you can just see, which is a set of clubs. You got the set of hearts there, you got the spade. You can almost make out the diamond. Almost make out the diamond. As I say, nature, as you can imagine, is starting to reclaim it, but it's still here, you can still see it. I think this is probably the most striking one for me coming out here, that you know, they were prisoners and it was tough. If you acted up, you got punished hard for it. And you were trapped here for 3 years and you had to work, you know. But amongst all that, they still were able to do things that I guess nourishes the soul, you know. And to have a garden bed and then to be even able to shape that into a deck of cards, you know, that's, I don't know, I find that quite remarkable, quite special. This photo behind me, I love this so much. This is just beautiful. This is our veterans, our soldiers from that time. Now, at this point in time, 1943 to 46, when Marrinup P.O.W camp was in operation, it was mostly guarded by our World War I veterans. Or other veterans that were injured and couldn't any longer serve, but still wanted to have a place in the army, serving their country the best they could. So this is a photo of July 1946, right at the very end of Marinup camp, as it was. For our young friend Fritz, I can't tell you what happened to him. I don't know. I can only imagine that he had served his time, probably sent back home to his country, to his loved ones. And no doubt, I'm sure he was thankful that he lived and he was able to go home. So imagine for a moment just the scenario that those fellas found themselves in. Miles from home, in a different country, basically in a cage in the bush, held captive. It's quite a heavy thought when you stop to think about it. And for a lot of them it was against their will too. They didn't choose to go to war. It's quite striking. Well, how good is this? So I'm just camping in the Marinup campground. They still call it the Marrinup Townsite. Back when the P.O.W camp was happening, this was a busy, bustling little township. There's not really anything around that would let you know that, other than some flat ground where huts and the shop and that were. There's some big concrete footings that I can't figure out what that is. I'm not actually sure. That's really all that's left out here from what would remind you that there was a town out here. So it's a nice spot. It gets busy, it's a populated campsite, so I mean, as you can hear people off in the distance. I don't know what the hell they're doing, but they sound like they're having fun, so whatever. So this will be me for the night. I think we're expecting a bit of rain, so I'll get the awning out. Swag will go over pretty much where you are right now, and should be a nice cozy night. So I've got one more thing to show you all, but I'm going to do it in the morning. I'm going to do it tomorrow. How good is this, eh? This is what it's all about. Absolute treat. It's a very wet camp. First light this morning. Rained all night. All night. Even got quite windy too, which isn't ideal. So the weatherman got it right. Said rain was coming. He got it right this time. The spot I want to take you this morning, it involves water. And it involves a very nice bushwalk. So I'm hoping this weather's going to stay clear now. I can see clear skies, so hopefully that rain has passed. I think there is a little bit more due at some point, but I think for now should be right. So I'm going to get a hot cuppa into me, get a bite to eat, let everything dry off a little bit before I pack up too. I'm in no rush, I got nowhere else to be. I'll take you to this spot. So the spot I'm taking you to, some may already know, is of course Marrinup Falls. Beautiful spot, rocky outcrop, water running through it. It is an absolutely beautiful spot. So Marrinup Falls, they are a part of the Marinup Brook, and this brook runs down the bottom of the hill, the bottom of the Darling escarpment, and eventually meets, oh, gonna have to enter full drive here. Comes down the bottom of the hill, the Darling escarpment, Darling Range, meets the Murray River. So it's all connected. Of course, Murray River, Peel Inlet, all our rivers and estuaries. So it's a beautiful, relatively unknown part of this area's water systems. And you just take this short walk and find this beautiful fall along the way. It's well worth knowing about and coming and finding. There's three main spots along this walk trail where you really get to walk down onto the rocky outcrop and see the falls. I've showed you two so far. Now I'm going to show you my favourite one of the three, the third spot. Just a second. Hang tight. So this is my favourite of the three. I feel like this one really encapsulates what these waterfalls are. It really shows this brook really is running down a hill, and as you can see behind me as it just floats on down this valley that we're in, it really captures the essence of what this brook is and what these falls are. This is my favourite of the lot. It's got a view, the water's running. It's just a beautiful, bloody beautiful spot, this one. Well, there's Marinup, P.O.W camp, a night at Marinup Camp Ground, and then Marrinup Falls, all done and dusted. I have thoroughly enjoyed doing this one. It's just such a special area out here. And remember, it's not WWII. This isn't WWII, this is Marinup. And it has its own rich story and great history. Definitely do come out here and explore this area for yourself. See the falls, see the P.O.W camp, come and spend a night or two here, enjoy this beautiful bush for what it is. It's a very enchanting and charming area. So thanks again for watching, stay safe and we'll talk soon. Alright.